Welcome to the Israel Illuminated channel. Today we will examine Israel as proof of God's existence. If someone asked for a single living exhibit of God's reality in history, something visible, testable, and stubbornly resistant to natural explanation, one could point to Israel and the Jewish people. Not because Jews are magically immune to history, nor because Israel is morally flawless, but because the Bible places Israel inside a prophetic framework so specific, so long-range, and so publicly verifiable that it functions like a signpost planted in world events. Scripture insists that God can be known not only through conscience and creation, but also through fulfilled prophecy. God declaring the end from the beginning, and then bringing it to pass according to Isaiah 46:9-11. And few subjects illustrate this claim more vividly than Israel's dispersion, persecution, preservation, regathering, Jerusalem's restoration, and the land's reclamation. More than 3 millennia ago, as Israel stood poised to enter the Promised Land, Moses warned the nation that covenant unfaithfulness would not merely produce spiritual consequences, but national ones. If Israel refused to heed the Lord, the curses would intensify, culminating in expulsion from the land and scattering from one end of the earth to the other, described in Deuteronomy 28:58-64. The striking feature of this warning is not only its severity, but its precision. It is not vague language about hard times. It describes removal from the land and worldwide dispersion. History records a sobering arc that aligns with Moses' warning. After the destruction of Jerusalem and the Temple in 70 AD, the Jewish dispersion accelerated, especially following the Second Jewish Revolt in 132 to 136 AD. Over the centuries, Jewish communities took root across Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and eventually the Americas and beyond, on every continent. By the beginning of the 20th century, only a small remnant remained in the land. Even Deuteronomy 4:27 declares that God will scatter the Jews among the peoples, and they will be left few in number among the nations where God will drive them. This prophecy perfectly matches the low numbers of Jews we see throughout the world today. Regardless of how one interprets every theological detail, the fact remains: an ancient people were scattered across the entire world in a way unmatched in scope and duration. Moses described it long before it happened, and history supplied the fulfillment. The prophecy does not stop with dispersion. Deuteronomy continues with an even darker forecast. Among the nations, Israel would find no rest, only dread, uncertainty, and fear, night and day, revealed in Deuteronomy 28:65-67. It is a chilling portrait of psychological and social insecurity, life hanging in doubt, a people living under threat. That description reads like a summary of Jewish history in exile. In country after country, Jewish communities were harassed, restricted, scapegoated, expelled, and targeted. Pogroms erupted, legal protections vanished, hatred metastasized. This long stream of affliction reached its most infamous climax in the Holocaust, when 6 million Jews were murdered in Europe during World War II. The tragedy is not only that persecution happened. Many groups have been persecuted, but that Scripture predicted the pattern of it as a defining feature of exile, and the pattern persisted across centuries and continents. Again, the prophecy is not a blurry guess. It is a precise forecast, followed by a precise historical reality. Moses also foretold something else that should have been unlikely: that the land itself would fall into desolation after the people were removed. Deuteronomy 29 describes future generations and foreigners looking at the land and asking why it had become a burning waste, unsown and unproductive, like a landscape under judgment written in Deuteronomy 29:22-27. The nations would wonder what happened, and the answer would be tied to covenant abandonment. This prophecy is remarkable because it does not merely speak about Israel's hardship. It speaks about the condition of the land, its barrenness and ruin becoming a public testimony. By the modern era, travelers described a region depleted, forests stripped, valleys neglected, agriculture diminished, swamps spreading disease. Mark Twain's descriptions from the 19th century capture the impression of barrenness and melancholy, language that echoes the biblical picture of desolation. Whatever one believes about theology, the broader historical observation stands. The land that once flourished under intensive cultivation became widely neglected and depleted during long centuries of upheaval and underdevelopment. Moses said it would happen. History again aligns. Here the storyline becomes even more difficult to explain by ordinary means. Many peoples have been conquered, exiled, and dispersed. Most eventually assimilate into the nations, lose distinct identity, or vanish from history. Yet the Hebrew prophets insisted Israel would not disappear. Isaiah recorded God's pledge that Zion would not be forgotten. I have inscribed you on the palms of my hands, written in Isaiah 49:14-16. Later Isaiah spoke with blunt confidence. Those who contended with Israel would be shamed, and God would uphold his people according to Isaiah 41:10-11. Jeremiah echoed it. God would discipline Israel but not destroy them completely, foretold in Jeremiah 30:11. And then Jeremiah framed Israel's endurance in cosmic terms. Israel would cease to be a nation only if the fixed order of the sun, moon, and stars ceased, shown in Jeremiah 31:35-37. This is not merely encouragement, it is a prophetic claim tied to the permanence of creation. The implication is staggering. Israel's survival would function as a kind of timekeeping device for divine faithfulness, and the survival happened. Despite exile, persecution, forced conversions, pogroms, ghettos, and genocide, the Jewish people remained identifiable as a people. They retained scripture, memory, tradition, and communal cohesion across centuries. One anecdote illustrates the oddity of that preservation. A teacher once quipped that one of the greatest evidences of biblical truth could be found in an ordinary phone book, Jewish names woven through the fabric of modern professional life, after countless attempts to erase them from history. The point is not to romanticize suffering, but to confront the improbability. By normal historical expectations, Israel should have dissolved. Yet the prophets declared Israel would remain. And they did. Next, we will examine the regathering from the ends of the earth. If preservation is astonishing, regathering is even more so. Scripture did not merely say Israel would survive in dispersion. It repeatedly said the dispersed would one day return. Isaiah envisioned a second great recovery, an assembling from the four corners of the earth, foretold in Isaiah 11:11-12. Jeremiah went further, declaring that the future regathering would become so momentous that it would eclipse even the Exodus in Israel's historical memory, written in Jeremiah 16:14-15. That is a breathtaking claim. A return so dramatic it would redefine the nation's greatest deliverance. Beginning in the late 19th century, Jewish return to the land accelerated through waves of immigration. What began as a gradual movement became an overwhelming surge after World War II. In the span of decades, a scattered people returned in large numbers to their ancient homeland, speaking again a revived national language, forming institutions, rebuilding cities, and reestablishing sovereignty. Whatever political debates surround modern events, the underlying phenomenon is historically unusual. A dispersed people regathered after nearly 2 millennia with national identity intact. The prophets described it. The world witnessed it. Finally, the scriptures attach a special weight to Jerusalem. Zechariah portrayed a future time when the Jewish people would again dwell in Jerusalem with ordinary life restored. Children playing, elders sitting in the streets, explained in Zechariah 8:4-8. He also warned that Jerusalem would become a heavy stone to the nations, drawing international pressure and conflict, shown in Zechariah 12:2-3. And Yeshua himself spoke of a long era when Jerusalem would be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled, written in Luke 21:24. The long historical arc is clear. Jerusalem slipped from Jewish control after 70 AD and remained under Gentile dominion for centuries. Yet in the 20th century, Jerusalem returned under Jewish administration in a way that stunned the world. The city did not become a quiet symbol of harmony. It became a focal point of global controversy, just as the prophets described. The dispute itself becomes part of the sign. Jerusalem's gravity is inexplicable unless something larger is at work. Next, we will analyze the land reclaimed, from waste to a garden. One more prophetic thread completes the picture. The land would not remain desolate once the people returned. Ezekiel recorded God's promise to gather Israel from the nations, rebuild the ruined places, cultivate the desolate land, and make it appear like the Garden of Eden written in Ezekiel 36:24, 33-35. That image is not merely agricultural. It is symbolic of reversal, curse turning toward restoration. In modern times, the land saw massive development. Swamps drained, deserts irrigated, agriculture engineered, trees planted, and cities expanded. Again, arguments can be made about the causes, technology, industry, and human labor, but the biblical point is not that Israel would reclaim the land effortlessly. The point is that the reclamation itself would happen as part of a prophetic restoration. Ezekiel said the waste places would be rebuilt, and the land would be cultivated. The transformation became visible enough that travelers could compare it to revival from barrenness. Is this coincidence or providence? At this point, the cumulative weight matters. Any single element, dispersion, persecution, or return, might be dismissed as historical accident. But 7 interlocking themes described centuries in advance, unfolding across long spans of time and in full view of the nations, is harder to wave away. The Bible dares the skeptic to explain why Israel's story tracks the prophetic script so closely. Scattered worldwide, persecuted among the nations, the land desolated, the people preserved, the exiles regathered, Jerusalem restored and contested, and the land reclaimed. Scripture itself argues that fulfilled prophecy is not a parlor trick. It is a signature of the living God. Isaiah records God's challenge. He alone declares what is coming and then brings it to pass, listed in Isaiah 46:9-11. In that sense, Israel becomes not merely a nation among nations, but a living witness that history has an author. Israel is not proof of God because Israel is perfect. Israel is proof of God because the Bible's prophecies about Israel are too specific, too sustained, and too publicly verifiable to dismiss lightly. Dispersion and regathering, suffering and survival, desolation and renewal. These are not small claims, and they were not spoken after the fact. They were embedded in Scripture long before their fulfillment began. So the question becomes personal. What will you do with this evidence? Will you file it away as coincidence, or will you recognize it as providence? The Bible's claim is clear. God exists, God speaks, and God acts in history. And the story is not finished. The same God who preserved his people, returned them, and restored their land will also bring history to its appointed conclusion, the triumph of his Son and the full restoration of his kingdom. Thank you for watching the Israel Illuminated channel. If you like our channel, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.